Are we rolling? Here, please.
You have to look once?
Yes, you are rolling. Thank you. Okay, we are on DAF Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. And the Gemara wanted to try and argue that when a woman receives an object, and initially it's not understood to be for the sake of Kiddushin, and then after giving it to her, he says, this is Haret Mekudeshesli with the object that I just gave you, her silence is meaningless because she could always argue, well, you didn't give it to me for that purpose. I'm holding on to it for the purpose that you originally gave it to me, so my silence does not have any halachic significance. The Gemara had started off with the following case. The case was a man presented a woman with an object like what's called a mat of myrtle branches that at face value was not worth a shavapruta. He gives it to her, and then he says, Haret Mekudeshesli with this mat. She and everyone else looking thinks it's not worth a shavapruta, so it's a meaningless act of kiddushin. After the fact, he says, no, there's coins intertwined within this thing. So the argument that the Chachamim who were witness to that object, to that thing, said, you know what? It's not a meaningful marriage because, like Rava says, it's silence after the fact, and silence after the fact is meaningless.
Thought it was for matrimony.
And Rava, thank you. Okay. You got to try a little harder. And it's rough outside. Anyway, and so and Rava says, I'll prove this to you. How will I prove this to you? I'll prove it to you with the following argument. We know that there's a halacha that if a man gives a coin to a woman as a pikadon, says, do me a favor, hold on to this for a minute, or any other object, and then after it's already in her hand, he says, Arayat Mekudeshesli, with this object that I gave you 5 minutes ago, he says, her silence is also not a valid acceptance of marriage, because she could say, he gave it to me for safekeeping. That's the reason why I'm holding on to it. I'm not holding on to it for matrimonial purposes. So the Gemara says, you see from that case, that silence after the fact, after the acceptance, and then she becomes real under the understanding that he wants it for Kiddushin, that silence is meaningless. So that's where we're up to. So the Kashu, we're up to the fourth line on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Kashu ba befum nahara mishmei de Rav Huna berei de Rav Yoshua. So on the bank of the river, or at the mouth of the river, I should really say, was where there was a place of study. And the Beis Medrash there, the yeshiva there, had a question that was asked in the name of Rav Huna berei de Rav Yehoshua. And the question was, Mi dame, how can you Rava compare the case of giving her a mat where she doesn't realize that it's not worth a shavapruta, and the case where he gives her something as a pikadon, asking her to watch it, and then afterwards says it's for kiddushin. Hasam b'toras pikadon yahavinhu nihala, savra ishadina lahu umitveri mechayevana behu. But hacha b'toras kiddushin yahavinhu nihala, v'iisa delo nichala lishdinhu. The question that was asked is, I could understand a case where a man gives a woman an object of value, but says that it's a pikadon. He says, please watch this for safekeeping. And she says, okay. 5 minutes later, he says, I really want it to be for marriage. So the reason why we would interpret her silence and her holding on to the object as not an acceptance of marriage is because, listen, I've been charged as the shomer of this object. I'm now financially, legally responsible for the safekeeping of this object. I've accepted to watch over it. And therefore, if I throw it to the ground and it breaks, I can be legally responsible. So I better just hold on to this until we straighten things out, and I get this guy not to be so romantically involved with me, right? Let me just play it cool, right? But in a situation where a man gives her a mat for matrimonial purposes, so she clearly understands from the outset that his objective is to marry her, but she thinks it's not worth a shavapruta, so why do I need to even acknowledge it, right? And then afterwards he tells her that it's worth a shavapruta. There, as soon as she realizes that this is a legal object of marriage, and she's not a shomer on it, let her just throw it to the ground if she doesn't want to be married. Let her say, Feh, I don't want to marry you, and she should throw it to the ground. So the fact that she didn't throw it to the ground, or throw it at him, is a sign that she is accepting it for Kiddushin. So how can you compare the case of Pikadon to the case of the mat? So Parich Ravachai Atu Kulu Nashi Dina Gamiri Hachanami Savri Ishadina Lahu Mitri Mischayavna Be'achriyusayu. So Ravachai says, what kind of question is that? Do you really think that all women are so well educated in halacha that just because he gave it to her originally for marriage, she should feel at liberty to throw it to the ground? Maybe she is not aware of the halacha, and maybe she thinks, you know what, I better hold on to it, because if I throw it to the ground, he could sue me afterwards, especially because he'll be feel so jilted that I didn't accept his marriage. So, and not realizing that that's not the halacha. So you can't really say that her silence is an acceptance of marriage, because otherwise she would have thrown it. Maybe she doesn't know the halacha that she's permitted to throw it to the ground with impunity. So Shalcha Rav Acha Barav L'Kamei de Ravina Kahai Mai. And therefore, later on, the question was posed to Ravina: if a man gives her a mat that at face value is worth less than a shava pruta, and then after she accepts it, he says, well, there's money woven into the mat, what is the halacha if she's silent at that point? So Shalach Lei Anan Lo Shamia Lan Hadar Ravuna Berei de Rabbi Hoshua Atun de Shamia L'Chu Chushula. So his response was, listen, I never heard that objection from Rav Huna Berei de Rav Yehoshua. I always heard the psak of Rava is that it's not a marriage bichlal. But if you heard that concern lodged by Rav Huna, then you should be choshesh for it, at least l'chumra, and be machmir and say that she needs a get before she can marry another man. Hahi itisa dahava kamizavna varshiki. So there was a woman who was selling varshiki. There's a whole big machlokes as what varshiki are, but over here Rashi says it's some kind of belt, belts these women were selling, but the Aruch and others have different interpretations of what these things are. Some say they're bundles of silk. Anyway, asahu gavra chataf varshika mina amrale hava nihali. So there was a man who comes along and grabs one of these items, okay? And she says, hey, give that back. So Amar La, he says to her, if I give it back to you, will you marry me? Will you accept it for kiddushin? So Shakalte v'ishtika. She takes it back and she's silent. So Va'amar Rav Nachman Yecholu lemeimar in shakli v'didi shakli. And she can after the fact say, no, I didn't take this for matrimony. I took it back because it was mine. And the only way that I could get back what belonged to me was by playing along with this guy. Eisvei Ravel Rav Nachman Kidsha begezel uvechamas uvegeneva ushachatav sela miyada v'kidsha mikudeshes. So the kasha is that there's a brisa that Rava presents, which is that if a man presents a woman with kiddushin, with stolen begezel, with stolen item, with a stolen object, or bechamas, or something that he had grabbed and paid for, but without the willing consent to sell from the seller, or if he burgled it. Or if a man grabs a coin from her hand and then gives it to her for the sake of kiddushin, so there we say that she is mikudeshes. So here, why over here do we say that she's not mikudeshes? So hasam bidishadich. The answer is that they made shiduchim in advance. In other words, the man grabbed the coin, she said, give it back, and they played a game, and he said, listen, I really want to marry you, and this is serious, and they made serious negotiations of marriage before the fact, and she accepts, and in other words, it's clear from the context that she's actually consenting to marriage by accepting the coin back, and she says you can have the coin and you can use it for kiddushin, and everything will be fine. Like Rashi says, Shadibor bar kodem lachein v'nisratzeis lihiskadesh lo. He had spoken to her beforehand, even before he had grabbed the coin from her hand, and she had consented to marriage, and therefore after the fact when he grabs the coin from her and gives it to her for the sake of kiddushin, we can understand that because they had previously been discussing it, that this is a valid marriage. How do you know that there is such a distinction to be drawn? The Brisa says that if a man says, here, take this coin that I owe you, and then the Brisa continues and he says, and then he says, do me a favor, accept that for matrimony. So bishas matan mos ratzasa mekudeshes lo ratzasa ena mekudeshes. So if he says this, he owes her money. And when he's paying back the debt, if at the moment that he pays back the debt, he says, I want to use this for marriage, so it depends. If she wants it for marriage, so then she's mekudeshes. If she doesn't want it for marriage, she's not mekudeshes. La'achar matan mos afilu ratzasa ena mekudeshes. But if he says it to her afterwards, after she's already taken the coin back as payment, then it doesn't make a difference what her desire is. She can't be married with that coin because he's not giving her anything. So my ratzasa umay lo ratzasa. So what is the definition of if she wants or if she doesn't want in the Reisha, that at the time that he gives her the coin, it's up to her to decide whether she wants to accept it as marriage. So ilema ratzasa da amra in lo ratzasa da amra lo. If you're going to tell me that she has to verbalize either yes or no, so ha ishtika havu kiddushin. So you mean to tell me that if she's silent, because she has to actually say no in order to reject it for marriage, that if she's silent, then it is kiddushin. V'nisni mikudesh stam ki hasam. So then why don't you say stamazoi, right? In the previous case, where where a man gives a woman an object for matrimonial purposes, and he says, I want you to watch this for safekeeping. Oh, wait a minute, I want to use it for marriage. There, we had said in the Bryce, if he gives it to her for the sake of marriage, at the time when he's giving it to her, he changed his mind and she is silent, right? So then she's mekudeshes. So just say here that if she's silent, she's mekudeshes, or just say she's mekudeshes, because that's the standard case. So elo ratzasa da amra in, lo ratzasa di ishtika. So you have to conclude that it means as follows. If she wants to accept the repayment of the debt as kiddushin, so then she has to actually verbalize yes. But if she's silent, then that's a sign that she's not accepting it for marriage, because she really just wants to get her debt back. So the katani de'ina mekudeshes, and yet it says that she's not mekudeshes. So my taima yecholu lomar in shakli v'didi shakli. Why? Because she could always say yes. I was taking back something that belonged to me all along. So you see that in that case, when a woman could say in shakli v'didi shakli, I'm just taking back something that belongs to me, then that's a reason. That's the way we interpret her silence. So ve'ela kasha hach the kidsha begezul v'chamasu v'geneva shechatav selam miyad v'kidsha mikudeshes. So what are you going to do with that previous brisa that Rava you quoted, that said that if you were a merkadesh a woman by grabbing a coin from her hand and then giving it back to her for kiddushin, she is mekudeshes even though she's silent. So elolav shma mina hadeshadich hadulo shadich. So you see very clearly, in order to reconcile the conflict between the two brises, is that one brise is talking about where before he did the act of grabbing it from her, they had already spoken about marriage and arranged to get married. And then the guy said, listen, I don't have any money on me, do me a favor. And he grabs the coin from her and says, Arei mekudeshes li b'tabazu. And the other case where he returns something that belongs to her, he didn't make any prior arrangements. There was no prior discussion of marriage, and she's caught off guard, and therefore her silence is just to be able to get her object back, not to accept marriage. Kinach nafshe de Rabbi Asi, ailu rabbana linikutinhu lishmaitze. When Rav Asi passed away, there was a big gathering of Chachamim, anyone who had ever heard any of Rav Asi's teachings, they said, let's get together and sort of compile an encyclopedia of Rav Asi's teachings all together by everyone who ever heard anything from Rav Asi, speaking up and saying what you learned from him. So Amar le Hahume Rabbanan v'Rabbi Yaakov Shemei Hachi Amar Rav Asi Amar Rav Mani. So Rabbi Yaakov quotes Rav Asi in the name of Rav Mani, Kishem she'ein isha niknes b'pachos mishava pruta, kach ein karka niknes b'pachos mishava pruta. Just like you can't do kiddushin with a coin that is worth less than, or an object less than a shava pruta, so too you cannot purchase real estate with anything less than a shava pruta. So Amru Leiva Hatanya Afal Pisha Inisha Niknes B'Pachos Mishava Pruta Karka Niknes B'Pachos Mishava Pruta, but you're in direct conflict with a brisa. How could Rav Asi have said that? The brisa says explicitly that you could use less than a shava pruta to purchase real estate. So Amar Le Kitanya Hi Bechalipin. So he says no. We're talking about two different mechanisms of kinyan. When you want to use the mechanism of kesef, which is a quid pro quo for the object. In other words, you're stating that the purchase price of the land is a half a penny, right? So then that's not a valid sale. If you acknowledge that the property is worth much more than half a penny, and that the purchase price is worth much more than a half a penny. But the mechanism of kinyan is chalipin, to do that consideration kinyan, where you give the owner of the land your handkerchief, which is worth less than a shava pruta, and by him lifting it up, he causes a transfer, but that's not the purchase price, so then that's a valid kinyan. It's a technical, mechanistic issue, right? Detanya, konin bichli v'afal pishen bo shava pruta. As the Brisa says, you are allowed to make a kinyan with a kli for chalipin, which is the context of that Brisa, even if it's worth less than a shava pruta. So hadr yasvi ka'amri, had amr Yehuda amar Shmuel. The rabbis were then still sitting, and they were discussing this halach in the name of Shmuel. Kol she'eni yodeya b'tiv gitin v'kiddushin lo yehi lo esek imahen. That Shmuel had said that anyone who does not know well the halachas of kiddushin and gittin should have nothing to do with them. So Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, v'kashin la'olam yoser midor hamabel. People who do engage in these things without proper education are doing a greater disservice to the world, bringing more harm to the world than even the great flood of Noach. And how do we know this? Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Alo v'chichesh v'ratzach v'gano v'na'ov paratzu v'damim b'damim nagau. That there's a pasuk in Hosea talking about people who do commit great acts of crime. And alo is to take an oath, v'chichesh, or and false oath, and deny it later, to murder, to steal, to commit adultery. Paratzu, these people have committed a great breach, and v'damim b'damim nagau, and they touch blood against blood. Now, what Rashi explains, v'damim nagau, is that this is a euphemism for doing acts of erva. In other words, allowing two people who are not allowed to get married, mixing blood with blood in an illicit fashion, because they don't know the halacha and they don't know how to make sure that these two people are kosher to get married. And my mashma kiddumatargim Rabbi Yosef, I'm sorry, it's not Rashi, but it's the Gemara itself, that Rabbi Yosef explained the Aramaic translation was moladin banin minashei chavrehon, that they have children from their friends' wives. In other words, a woman did not properly get a get, because the person who was masader her get did not know the halacha properly, and therefore they go ahead and they marry a woman who's technically really married, and they have children that are mamzerim from them, chovin al chovin mosifin, and they just add blood to blood. In other words, they add liability to liability. So uchesiv. So that pasuk is talking about creating havoc with illicit marriages, right? Uchesiv. But now let's take a look at another pasuk, which is in Hosea, the very next pasuk, which says, Al kain te'avel haaretz ve'umlal kol yoshvei ba. That because of this, the land will be in a state of mourning and a state of bereftness, anyone who lives there, including b'chayas asada uva'of hashamayim, even the animals of the field and the birds of the sky, v'gam degei hayam ye'asefu, and even the fish of the ocean will be taken in. In other words, will perish because of this great calamity of sin. Now that's all discussing where there's illicit marriages because of people who are not well educated. Ve'ilu b'dor hamabel, contrast that to a pasuk having to do with the story of the flood. Lo nigzera gzera al dagim shebayam, that the Brisa says that the fish were not killed in the flood. Shene'amar mikol asher becharava mesu v'lo b'dagim shebayam, that only creatures on dry land died, but the fish in the ocean did not die. So you see that the flood did not create as much death and decimation as people who cause illicit marriages. Ve'ilu hacha afilu dagim shebayam, and here even the fish died. So frek the Gemara ve'ema da'ada avid lakulhu. But the Gemara says, how do you know that it's only through the creation of illicit marriages that all of this carnage comes to the world? Maybe you have to do a false oath and murder and stealing and adultery and creating illicit marriages in order for all of this carnage to come. How do you know that it's just illicit marriages alone? So the Gemara says, Lo sal kedai tichsiv, because it says you wouldn't think that. It says, Ki mipnei elah, because there's a pasuk in Yirmiyah that just says, Ki mipnei Allah avalah haaretz, that it's through just false vows alone that the earth goes into a state of mourning because of all of the death. So you see, even one item on that list is the cause of all of this death and mourning. But maybe only false vows alone causes death and mourning. However, these other things need to be done in unison. Murder and stealing and illicit marriage in order to bring upon this great death. So the Gemara says, Miksiv u partsu ksiv. And I'll tell you how I know. It just says, it doesn't say u partsu, that they create this breach through creating illicit marriages, but creating breach through illicit marriage, which implies that each one of these items is a standalone because you don't have the conjunction and when you talk about the creation of illicit marriages. So that's Rav Asi's proof that a person who inserts himself in marriages and doesn't know what he's doing is bringing great destruction to the world. Hadur Yasvi Uka Haditnan. They were continued discussing Rav Asi's quotes, and they quoted the following Mishnah: Ha'isha shehivia chatasa v'meisa yaviu yarshin olasa. That if a woman had just given birth to a child, she successfully brought her chatas and after childbirth, and now she still has to bring her ola after childbirth. But tragically, she dies. So her heirs should bring her carbon ola on her behalf because she was already indebted to bring it. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel v'hu shehi frishasa mechayim balo frishasa mechayim lo. But Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, but that's only if she set aside the animal or the money while she was still alive. But if she hadn't yet set it aside, the heirs do not have to fulfill that korban. So alma kesavar shibuda lav deoraisa. So you see that a debt that has been generated by the decedent does not pass over to the heirs biblically. It's only rabbinically that the heirs have to fulfill the obligations, their financial obligations imposed by the Torah upon the decedent, and that's why only if she had set aside the money and committed herself to this money or to the animal do the heirs have to fulfill it. But if not, they're not required to do so. But on that, Amar Ravasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Afal Gav Shelo Yifrisha Mechaim. Ravasi disagrees, and he says even if she did not set aside the money while she was still alive, there was still just a debt based on her biblical obligation. Alma Ksavar Shibuda Hava Deoraisa. So we see that Ravasi, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, holds that there is a debt that is created by the Torah, and if the Torah creates a debt upon you, the heirs have to fulfill that even midioraisa. So frak the Gemara v'hapligi b'chad zimna. Why do you need this machlokas if this machlokas was already explicated elsewhere? The Rav Shmuel Damri Toravayu Milva Alpe Ena Gova Min Hayorshin V'lo Min Alakuchos. The Rabbi Yochanan V'Reish Lakish Damri Toravayu Milva Alpe Gova Min Hayorshin Bein Min Alakuchos. Gova Bein Min Hayorshin Bein Min Halakuchos. Yet we have this previous machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel, where Shmuel was quoted as saying, is that if a man had borrowed money without any, or just with witnesses, but without a shtar, so even though that debt was generated, but there's no paper to record that debt, if the borrower dies, his heirs do not have to pay it back. So that's what Shmuel said. But Rabbi Yochanan, together with Reish Lakish, said, no, you do have to pay it back. And not only that, but even if the decedent sold off his assets such that you have to go to the buyer in order for the lender to be able to collect the debt, you're allowed to do that. So you see very clearly that this machlokus of whether shibud is deoraisa or not deoraisa is already recorded over here. Or Shmuel says, regardless of how the debt was generated, even if there's no piece of paper, shibuda. Rabbi Yochanan says no matter how the debt was generated, shibuda is deoraisa, and the heirs have to make good on the debt. And Rabbi Yochanan says no, it's only if they have a legal piece of paper to collect on it. That's when we force the heirs to pay off. But if there's no piece of paper to document it, so then the heirs are off the hook. So you see that he holds shibud is lav deoraisa. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why you needed to say this machlokas twice. Tzricha. Di'i itmer beha. He says, if we only had the latter case of debt, maybe the only reason why Shmuel says that you're off the hook is because the laws of debts are not recorded in the Torah. Avol bahach emamoda lahu Rabbi Yochanan. But over here, maybe you would agree to Rabbi Yochanan because the debt has been generated midioraisa, where the Torah has said you're obligated to do something, you're obligated to bring a korban. Maybe a debt that's generated by the Ribono Shel Olam himself, Shmuel would be more machmir on the heirs than in the case of a self-generated debt. Ulareish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan Ulareish Lakish. The Iyashmin Baha, by the way, davening's not until...
I'm going somewhere.
Oh, okay. All right, okay.
Tomorrow's Sunday schedule, right?
Yeah. The Iyashmin Baha, Baha Ka'amar Rabbi Yochanan, Demilva Ksuva B'Torah Ksuva B'Shtar Damya. And if I only had the former case of the korban, only over here does Rabbi Yochanan machmir on the heirs to say that since Hashem himself generated this debt upon you, you have to fulfill it, even though your mother never set aside the money or the korban. Aval bahach emamodi leili Shmuel. But in this case, maybe Rabbi Yochanan says a self-imposed debt that's not generated by Hashem, maybe we'll go easy on the heirs and not require them to pay back, and therefore it's tzricha. Amar Rav Papa, hilchas amilva al peh goyva min hayorshim, ve'eno goyva min halakuchos. And in the final psak, Rav Papa sort of creates a middle ground. He says that if there's an oral debt that was generated, and then the person, the borrower died, so the lender can collect only from the heirs, but he cannot collect from buyers, people who had bought property from the decedent after the loan was made, and therefore sort of they really are on the hook, just like the heirs are, but we exempt them. We don't allow a lender from collecting from the buyers. Gova min hayorshim shibuda deoraisa, ve'eno gova min halakuchos deles lekala. So Rav Papa is of the following opinion. Really, there's a din of shibuda deoraisa. There's a din that a debt is created by the Ribono Shel Olam, and therefore midioraisa, the heirs have to pay off that debt. Why then can you not collect from lakuchos, people who bought property from the decedent after the fact? The answer is that's a rabbinic accommodation. Really, midioraisa, you should be able to collect from them, but we have to be able to create an accommodation for buyers, because otherwise people are not going to buy anything. It's going to create a breakdown in commercial trade, because everyone's going to think, well, if I buy this from you, there's no way for me to know whether this is encumbered property or not, because if it was an oral debt, there's not even any recorded documentation to say whether you're a person in debt yourself who's selling it to me. So therefore, in order to accommodate this whole scenario of coming after a buyer after the fact without him being protected, Chazal needed to protect all buyers, and they said that even though midioraisa there was a shibud, but you can't collect from a buyer. Let's go weiter. Now we go to the next part of the Mishnah, which does not deal with kiddushin anymore, but rather deals with how a woman is liberated from a marriage. What are the two ways that a woman is liberated from a marriage, Rabbi Say? Get and misas habal, through divorce and through the husband's death. So that's what the Mishnah had said. Bishlam get v'chasav lasefer krisus. I could understand that a woman gains her liberation through a get, because there the Torah says he shall write for her a scroll of severance. Ela misas habal minolan. But how do you know that a woman gains her liberation from her husband's death? Maybe you could argue that a woman can never marry after her husband dies because she never got a get. The Gemara says, Svarahu, hu asra v'hu sharasa. The Gemara says it's only logic. It was the husband, his existence in the world, which precludes her from other men. So his absence from the world will permit her to other men. Frek the Gemara v'ha arayos da'asra lahu v'lo shari lahu. But wait a minute, there are plenty of cases of erva, of arayos, where even after the death of the person that she's married to, she's not permitted to his relatives. So for example, a girl gets married and her husband dies. She's not allowed to marry her deceased husband's father or son, right? So you see that sometimes there's a permanent stigma that remains even after the husband's death. So how do you know that this is not true in all cases of marriage? So Ela mida Amar Rachmana Yevama she'ein labanim asura hayesh labanim muteres. So the Gemara says you actually have a source in the Torah itself. The Torah says that only a woman who is a Yevama when her husband dies and leaves no children. So that implies that if a husband dies and he left her children, that she's not allowed to, that she's not subject to Yibum, and therefore she can go marry whoever she wants. So that in itself is the indication. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. B'dilma ein labanim asura la'alma v'shar liyavim. V'yesh labanim l'kuli alma nami asura. Maybe no. Maybe the law of Yibum teaches me that if the husband dies without children, she can marry the deceased husband's brother. But if her husband dies with children, so then she can't marry anybody. So Ella mida Amar Rachmana Almana Lekoin Gadol Asura Halakoin Hedyot Sharya. So the Gemara says you really learn it from this part of the Torah. The Torah says that a widow is not allowed to marry a Kohen Gadol, but you see that she's allowed to marry a regular Kohen. The fact that she's a widow, that indicates that she's perfectly okay to a Kohen. So you see that a man is allowed to marry a widow. So the Gemara says V'dilma Lekohen Gadol Belav Lekuli Alma Ba'aseh. So the Gemara says that's not necessarily so. Maybe the Torah is only saying that if a Kohen Gadol marries an Almana, he incurs an additional mitzvah lo saseh. But in all other cases of a widow marrying a man, there's only a violation of the mitzvah aseh. Because the Torah says, V'yatza v'haisa li'ish acher al yedei gerushin v'lo al yedei misa. What's the mitzvah aseh? The mitzvah aseh would be that the Torah says that when a man divorces his wife, she's allowed to marry someone else. So that indicates only through divorce can she marry someone else, but through any other mechanism other than divorce, she's not allowed to marry anybody else. So hai aseh maya vidite. So the Gemara says, I don't understand why it would be necessary to resort to a mitzvah aseh. Ida ahanya misas abal tishtari legamre. If her husband's death is a mechanism to break the marriage, so then she should be completely permitted. And idolo ahanya misas abal tukma b'milsa kamaisa. So, and if her husband's death is not a mechanism of breaking the marriage, so then there's already an existing isser of eishes ish. So why do you need an additional mitzvah aseh or an additional mitzvah lo aseh to be added onto this woman? So alama lo afikta mimisa alama lo. The Gemara says, why not? No, I could understand it. Afikta mimisa ve'ukimta al aseh. Maybe no. Maybe when a husband dies, really that is a mechanism to break the severity of her being an eishes ish, such that if you sleep with her, there's a death penalty for a married woman. Maybe when her husband dies, there's no longer a death penalty attached to sleeping with her, but there is a mitzvah aseh that you violate by being intimate with her. Mida dahava psuli hamukdashim. The miikara ispuhu meila va'asiri begiza va'avoda. Parkinu meila lespu begiza va'avoda asiri. And it's very similar to other situations in the Torah, where there's a lessening of the severity of the isser, but the isser still exists. What's an example? So let's say you have an animal that was already sanctified, and it no longer becomes usable for its sanctified purpose. So for example, originally when the animal was sanctified, it is, if you were to go ahead and use it for personal use, you would be liable for a carbon me'ila. And furthermore, you're never allowed to shear or work that animal. But let's say the animal becomes unusable, develops a mum, and you can now go ahead and be poda that animal. So the halacha is, once you're poda the animal, you remove the stigma of me'ila, but there still remains upon the animal a permanent prohibition of shearing and working the animal, even after it's been redeemed. So maybe a married woman is like that. When she's married and her husband is alive, so then there's an isser eishes ish of death penalty. When the husband dies, maybe that death penalty severity is removed, but there still remains a minor stigma of you can't marry her until she receives a divorce, and she can't get a divorce because her husband is dead. So rather the Gemara says we have to derive it from somewhere else. Mida Amar Kra Pen Yamus B'Milchama V'ish Acher Yikachena. It's based on another pasuk where the Torah says that there's an exemption for a person who's been married for less than a year to exempt himself from conscription to the Jewish army to go to battle. Why? Because the Torah says, because there's a tragedy involved in a man dying in war for having been married for such a short amount of time, and someone else will marry her. The very fact that the Torah says that when a man dies, someone else could marry his wife is itself an indication that death is the mechanism to free her for marriage. So Maskef la Rav Shisha Berei de Rav Idi, Ema man achar yavam. So the Gemara says, maybe I'll argue that this other man that will marry her, that the Torah is talking about, man acher yavam. Who's this other man who will marry her? Not a regular guy off the street, but rather her deceased husband's brother. And the Torah is talking about Yibum. So Amar Ravashi based Shuvas B'davar. So Ravashi says, I'll give you two reasons why that's not a good question. Chada di yavam lo ikri acher. First of all, a yavam is not called another guy. He's called the yavam. And va'od ksiv usnei'aha isha acharon v'chasav la sefer krisus. And also because the very law of divorce talks about the Isser of Machzir Grushasa, that the Torah does not allow a man to remarry his divorcee if she has already been married in the interim to another man. So the Torah says if the second husband dislikes her and writes her a scroll of divorce, Ochi Amusa Ishar Acharon, or if the second husband dies, in both of those cases, her first husband cannot remarry her. So the iska shmisa legerushin, ma gerushin sharia v'gomeres, af misa sharia v'gomeres. So what you see from here is that the Torah is connecting death to divorce. Just like a divorce permits a woman and is a final liberator from marriage, so too death permits a woman and is a final liberator of marriage. Okay, next, v'hayavama niknes b'biyah chulei. A yavama, we have some extra time, unless you guys are running to somewhere else, but we have some extra time. Davening is not until 7, so we might as well go a little bit further. V'hayavama niknes b'biyah. A yavama, said the Mishnah, is acquired through biyah and biyah alone. There is no other mechanism of marriage available to a yavama. So the Gemara says, b'biyah minolan. Where do we know this from? Amar kra yavama yavo aleha ulekachalo liisha. Because the Torah says her yavam will come upon her, which is a euphemism because it's describing the physical act of intimacy, and thereby take her to him as a wife. Ve'ema l'kula misa ke'isha. But the Gemara says, why do you say that? Maybe it's the fact that the Torah says that Yibum makes her your wife. It also therefore is directly implying that the mechanism of marriage that works for any woman works for Yibum. So the Gemara says, Lo sal gadaitach detanya. You would not think such a thing, because look at the following brisa. It says in the brisa, Yachal Yehu Kesef Ushtar Gomrim Ba Kedech Shehabia Gomeres Ba. You might think that both Kesef and Shtar, money or a contract, which works with regular marriage, could work with Yibum. So Tamulomar V'yibima. The Torah says V'yibima. So the actual verb of Yibum implies a physical intimacy between the man and the woman. Rashi explains Bia Mashma, Shana Alea Kasuv La'akev, and therefore the fact that the Torah uses the word V'yibima a second time, Yavama Yavo Alehash, would have been sufficient. Why does it have to say V'yibima at the end of the pasuk? That teaches me that Bia Gomeres Ba Ve'en Kesef Ushtar Gomrim Ba. That extraneous word tells me that there has to be physical intimacy between the two in order to consummate the marriage, and nothing else. Ve'ema mai v'yibima debal korcha miyabe. But wait a minute, we also know from the Gemara that extra word v'yibima teaches me a different halacha. It teaches me that even if a man coerces a woman into intimacy, that creates a legal yibum marriage. So isn't that what you need that last word for? So the Gemara says, well, you can actually use it for both purposes, because in Cain lema kra v'yibeim, my v'yibima shamas mina tarti. Why then did the Torah have to say v'yibima with the mapik? It could have just said the word v'yibeim, which is in itself extraneous, and you would learn from there that marriage works bal korcha. The fact that he uses the word v'yibima with the extra hey teaches me both things. It teaches me both that A forced intimacy creates yibum, and it teaches me secondarily that any other mechanism of marriage that normally works in a regular marriage does not work in this case. Okay, I think we will hold it here for today. Have a wonderful day of Freilich and Purim.